morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. We're chatting with you because you're going to be heading to Montreal to talk about this. But first, I want to understand, how do young people typically interact with and around kids with disabilities?
Yeah, young people are generally, I think their impulse is inclusive and they want to be inclusive of everyone. But one of the challenges is that there are two sort of competing things happening with young children. One is nature and one is nurture, like many things in social science. So the first thing is that kids are going through cognitive development and they're having difficulty with abstraction. So what that is basically they're having difficulty thinking about things that aren't concretely observable. And so it can be hard for them to understand things like learning disabilities or other hidden disabilities. At the same time, it's difficult for children to because they're being exposed to a lot of ideas about disability that are maybe a little bit deficit thinking and not the greatest representation of disability in a variety of different sources in their lives.
Yeah, I was thinking back to when I went into elementary school. I had no knowledge of all different types of abilities. How much education is important prior to our children going to school?
I mean, it's really important that anytime we have an opportunity to talk about different lived experiences and diversity, whether it be disability or other historically marginalized groups, I think that's really helpful for students to be exposed to different ideas. Because when you're young, you're also developing like in and out groups, and it's a very basic sort of premise that children will sort of be more interested in children that are like similar to them in a variety of ways, and so they'll exclude people who they perceive as different. And so a little bit of education around that difference it can go a long way.
How much do you think this has changed in recent years?
We've come a long way, but what your listeners might be surprised to learn is that children with disabilities didn't have public access to education until 1980. It's a little bit of a shocking fact. So we've only been doing this for a relatively short period of time, and we've gotten a lot better at making our spaces more accessible with the AODA legislation and things of that nature. But we really need to do a better job of making students more socially included. A lot of scholars are saying that it's about a sense of belongingness in school. I'm a new father. I have a 2, a 4, and a 5-year-old at home, and I think about them a lot, at school, and I want nothing more for them to feel a sense of belongingness with their peers. And as adults, we change the environment and we train teachers and we do lots of things. But at the end of the day, it's the students, it's children that have a ton of power with whether students are included or excluded, whether they're bullied or not bullied, and whether ultimately they feel that sense of belongingness. So I think that's a really big piece of it.
We were just chatting about this on the weekend. My sister and I, she has a couple daughters in school, and kids just point out the obvious. But when a child of that small brain is trying to process that information, it can seem as bullying, saying, your hair is short. That's a fact. But what she hears is that makes her different. That's wrong. Or you're really short. And that's a fact, but she hears it as something. So I can imagine the layers for kids with disabilities who already feel different and have that pointed out. How important is the education around that?
Yeah, it's really important. And when we look at the research, one of the things we find is that students report having fewer friendships at school when they have disabilities. And a lot of that is just, I think, an ignorance around not understanding disability and people being afraid of things they don't understand. And that's, something that we can do as educators is to say, here's what disability looks like. Here's what it looks like from a strength-based perspective. So I know in a moment we're going to talk about these set of lessons that I developed. And, one of the things in there is working with parasport athletes and really showcasing disability from a strength-based perspective.
Well, let's launch into that then. So you developed a 12-lesson program aimed at changing the way kids think about people with disabilities. What's the main idea behind that?
Yeah, so the main idea here is really to train teachers first to challenge their own preconceived notions about how they've been exposed to disability and the things that they have come to learn about disability, so that they feel prepared to provide these 12 lessons to students. And I always say these 12 lessons are just a starting place. I hope that teachers take this and get inspired to come up with even better and creative more lessons on their own. But in these lessons in particular, it consists of 2 6-lesson units. So the first 6 lessons really focuses on getting a baseline and understanding where students' understandings are at. So we ask students to provide their own definitions of disability and draw pictures of characters with disabilities and develop mind maps with their peers in class about all the different disabilities they know. We talk about inclusion. We read storybooks with progressive representation of disability. And they play cooperative games in the gym with their peers with exceptionalities. From there, the second set of lessons really focuses on strength-based perspectives of disability through parasport. And of course, being a Canadian, we used sledge hockey as the target sport, but it could be it could be wheelchair basketball, seated volleyball, any of these goal ball. So in these lessons, we introduce students to different parasports. Parasport athletes come in, talk about their own experiences, which is a really important part of the program, because what we found in the research is that the more exposure and experience people have with disabilities, the less fearful they are and the more positive their attitudes ultimately are. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you've done some testing, as you mentioned, with these lessons. What's been the results so far?
Yeah, so far we've had some really interesting findings. We've ran the study once, which was my doctoral dissertation, with a small group of students, and we found that students think more positively about disability after the lessons. But we wanted to replicate that and do it with a much larger group. So we did this with 192 students recently, and we found that that students have more positive attitudes towards disability after we control for age. So it's really exciting.
What's the age group that you're aiming to target?
So the target was grades 3 to 7. The lessons were developed for grades 4 to 6, or junior education, but we included grades 3 and 7 because there were some split classes in the mix as well.
Do you think there's some takeaways for the rest of us that you learned in this process?
There's a lot of takeaways. I mean, one of the major ones is that we have to, present students with different ideas about disabilities, more progressive ideas, so that they're not fearful, and they're not, and they're not. They don't not know about disability, and that will help them to be more comfortable asking their peer who's sitting next to them in class to be a part of their group project, or to come to that birthday party this weekend, or to play at recess. Those are kind of the simple things that we're hoping will happen.
What's the plan for making these lessons more widely available?
So there's a couple things on the go. I've made the lessons completely free and accessible, so anyone who's listening who might be interested could reach out, and I could provide those lessons free of charge. We do offer some professional development around that if people aren't comfortable, doing the lessons just yet. We're also going to be presenting at CSSE in Montreal, which is a conference that will give us an opportunity to hopefully reach a larger audience.
Yeah, so you're heading to Montreal on Wednesday.
That's right.
How important is it for all of you to present this in this forum?
It's really important for a couple reasons. There will be other people, other researchers there, and it's really important that other researchers hear this so that they can maybe try it out and see if it works in other settings with different samples. But also, this conference also attracts a lot of practitioners, teachers, educational assistants, and I think that's really an important piece of this, because they're going to be ambassadors for inclusions, and they're going to help to model this to their students, and it's really important that they understand that first.
We do have to wrap, but I do want to know how students with disabilities feel about all of this.
Yeah, so we have included people with disabilities throughout the process of creating the lessons and implementing them, and so far the feedback has been really positive.
They feel more included.
So far, so good.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for coming in today, and good luck at the conference.
Thank you very much.